Hi there, and welcome to ICND 1 2.0, operating Cisco iOS software.
So that operating system is that software that runs on that physical chassis that is going to give us management capabilities and govern the logic that the device is bound to.
So what do we call this operating system that we find on our routers and switches, Dan?
Well, when we're talking about it, most of the time we'll just say iOS. But iOS is in fact too ambiguous. Because if you were to crack open Apple products, they would in fact also have the iOS. But here we're talking about Cisco iOS. Anytime you're talking about a Cisco router chassis or a CatOS switch chassis, those have the Cisco iOS running on top. Not all Cisco chassis have the iOS, though, to be clear. Not everything is a router or CatOS switch. For instance, the Nexus switching line has what is called NX-OS. But how different is it from Cisco iOS? Not that different. Cisco tries to make our lives easier and not force us to learn 50 different operating systems. So even routers and switches, even though they're fundamentally different, are managed in many ways, not in all ways, but in many ways, the same way. So yeah, we're talking about routers and switches, and they have a lot of different functions. Security, scalability, reliability, and the configuration that we type into these chassis comes in and speaks to the iOS, which then tells the chassis how to do its job.
So we'll be using the iOS in this course on both switches and routers. But the operations that are going to be performed are definitely going to be different. Because our switches are designed to do one thing, and our routers are designed to do a completely different thing. So as Dan said, we'll be typing in commands. We won't be pointing and clicking with a GUI interface. No, we'll be typing in commands. We could copy and paste, though. We could do things outside of the iOS in Notepad and copy and paste it into the command line interface. When we want a command to be executed, we hit enter. But Dan, one of the most difficult things about any operating system that we're learning is where we go to do the different things that we want to do. Because we're going to have distinctive prompts or distinctive areas that we have to go to accomplish those tasks.
First, when we look at our prompt, there's two fundamental things you're always going to see with it. You're always going to see your host name. And there are some defaults. A switch host name is switch. A router host name is router. So that's always going to be the first part of it. Always. And then we have the mode that we're in. The mode could be a single punctuation mark, like a greater than symbol, or a pound symbol, the hash symbol. Or it could be something like config pound or config if. And in each of these modes, it gives us commands that we can successfully type in, and some commands we can't do here, but we can do it in a different mode. It gives us privileges as well. In some modes, we may not have passed all of the gates that the operating system has put forth for all the administrators to prove their worth, prove their credentials are the high-level admin credentials, and maybe the alternative could be guest-level privileges to the operating system. So modes control both privilege and what I can do. So I may not be able to configure an interface from the first mode that I see, but I could navigate my way through the various intermediary modes to get to a place where I could say, I want this interface to have this IP address, or I want to disable this interface, or maybe just provide a description.
The very first mode we are going to see when we access our switches and our routers is user exec mode. But Dan, how do I know that I'm in user exec mode? Is there something at the command prompt that tells me that?
Yeah, there certainly is. And this is a place where we don't spend much time, quite frankly. This place called user exec mode. But we're in tourist mode here. Whenever we have this greater than symbol, I've heard some Cisco instructors, I don't think this way, but I've heard some people say, when you're in the mode with the greater than symbol, everyone is greater than you. Okay? But you are in tourist mode. And when I say tourist, you can do sightseeing with a few show commands, but not the ones that would divulge too much information about the chassis to be a major security threat. So you wouldn't be able to see passwords. You wouldn't be able to see the fundamental configuration that might be compromised if it was divulged. But you could do ping. You could test connectivity. You could look at the interfaces. Are they up or are they down? But not much more. And certainly nothing that would manage or configure the chassis can be done from this mode. So I need you to enable me, Raymond. I need you to enable me to get out of this mode.
I love what you said there, Dan. You said, enable me. You just gave everybody the command that moves you from user exec mode to privileged exec mode. Why do we call it privileged exec mode? You're no longer a tourist. You type in enable. In user exec mode, you have gone from being a tourist to having full administrative rights on this switch. But again, how do we know we're in privileged exec mode, Dan?
Well, if the greater than symbol means everybody is greater than you, the pound symbol means you can pound the chassis to dust with your configuration. Now, people don't think that way, but you do have the full set of commands available to you in your arsenal. Some commands, when done the wrong time for the wrong reasons, can be detrimental to the chassis. So pound indicates that you have privilege exec privileges, which in fact have a number of 15, which in the overall scheme, a privilege of level of 15 is the most we can have numerically. The most we can have. And I've got a challenge there, Raymond. I now have authority over this chassis. So you're telling me all I've got to do is type in enable, and then boom, I have privileges. I thought these were supposed to be secure chassis.
Right out of the box, there is no security on our switches. They're designed to forward frames. That's their job. We, as administrators, will have to set up that security. So, in this case, we can see that all we need to do is type in enable. At some point in time, we are going to have to set a password to protect the movement from user exec mode to privilege exec mode.
So we could set what would be called an enable password to protect this. So it's not something that will be beyond us after we get even a little bit of exposure to Cisco commands.
The hardest thing about any new product, service, or feature that is out on the market is figuring out where you have to go and do the things that you want to accomplish. For example, I want to configure a password on this particular device. Where do I go and do that? I want to set up the interface to have a certain speed and duplex. Where do I go and do that? I need to figure out how to set an IP address on the device so I can manage it from a remote location. Knowing where to go and do these things makes your life a lot easier. And it doesn't matter whether it's a new operating system or a new toy or a new device. we're going to have that challenge. So don't get discouraged. The more you practice with the actual operating system, the more you play with it, the easier it's going to become for you. So let's go ahead here and hit enter to get started. And the first mode we're in is known as user exec mode. We know we're in user exec mode because of the greater than symbol. It appears right after the host name. User exec mode gives us very limited commands that we can look at. Let's go ahead and use our question mark here. We'll talk about this more later, but it's for help. That's what the question mark's for. And we can see the commands that we can execute here in user exec mode. These commands that we have available to us in user exec mode are going to give us limited abilities. We're not going to be able to do anything that's going to change the actual configuration on the device. We're not going to be able to look at output that would require elevated privileges to look at it. So we have guest level access here. That's really what we're looking at. If you want to look at more detailed output, and you want to look at those things that really, really matter to us administrators, you have to get into privilege. You type in enable privilege exec mode. Now, I hope you realize something here. It never asked me for a password to get into user exec mode. It didn't even ask me for a password to get the privilege exec mode, where now I have full administrative rights to ASW1. Sounds like a security vulnerability to me. Definitely is. But this is the default behavior of our switches right out of the box. There is no security whatsoever. So we're going to be talking about security a little later on and how we can protect connectivity to user exec mode as well as privilege exec mode. But now we're in privilege exec mode, and we're going to have a lot more commands available to us. As you can see, every time I have the option of more, I hit spacebar, and I can get more output. If I wanted to see one line at a time, I hit enter. But I like spacebar. Spacebar gives me a page at a time. When I look at output here, I'm going to see a lot of verbose output in regards to things that the administrators allowed to see. So privilege exec mode, very important. To do configurations here? Yeah, minimal configurations. Really, privilege exec mode is all about verification and troubleshooting. If I really want to start configuring, I have to get into global configuration mode by typing in configure terminal. In global configuration mode, I now have the ability to configure those things that are going to affect my device on a global scale. So on a whole. But it's also where we find those commands that just don't have any better place. So there's no sub-configuration mode that they would better fall into, so we just place them here in global configuration mode. Here. Wow, that's a lot. But let's say I wanted to configure an interface specifically, such as interface fast Ethernet 0/1. Well, I type in interface fast Ethernet 0/1. Hit enter. Now I'm in interface configuration mode for fast Ethernet 0/1. Now I can start configuring commands for that specific interface. And the great thing about the Cisco IOS is it's only going to give you access to those commands that apply to that specific configuration mode. So you're not going to find commands here that you would use at global configuration mode. You're not going to find commands here that you'd use for another type of sub-configuration mode. You're only going to find those commands that work with interface configuration mode. One level in the hierarchy, I can type in exit. Let's say I wanted to configure some specific parameters for the console port of ASW1. I could type in line console 0. Notice I'm now in line configuration mode for console 0. We'll see more of console 0 in a future demonstration. But folks, it's really all about becoming accustomed to where you go to do the different things you want to do. So I encourage you, play around with the iOS as much as you can, either on real equipment or utilizing your hands-on labs. And one last thing here. Let's say I am deep in the actual tree-like structure of the iOS. How do I go all the way back to privilege exec mode? Well, we saw a little earlier that you could type in exit to go up one level in the hierarchy. But if I want to go all the way back to privilege exec mode, you type in end, E-N-D, and hit enter.